and welcome to 𝗤𝗵𝗱𝗄houseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today we have a plant care video for lipstick plant, botanically known as Aeschynanthus. This variety is commonly called the Black Pagoda. The variety name, botanical name is 𝗺𝗶𝗱𝗄𝗰𝘁𝘀𝗋. And then there is the radicans, which has a different color flower. So the lipstick plants are so called because their flowers really do look like little tubes of lipstick. Now I'm going to show you a little close-up view here of this one here, the Black Pagoda, and you can see how gorgeous. Well, first of all, it has gorgeous variegated foliage, which the radicans doesn't. It's just a green. But also here you can see those look like little tubes of lipstick when they're when the plant blooms, and with the flowers do. I'm going to show you right now two pictures of my other lipstick plant, the radicans, that has a really nice red flower. And you'll see that it really does look like a little tube of lipstick, which is really, really cool. So this plant, so we want to talk about how to keep it happy and healthy so that you can have one blooming in your indoor garden as well. So this plant is a member of the 𝗍𝗄𝗃 family, and it's closely related to African violets and Gloxinia. The plant grows wild in the humid forest of Asia, from the Himalayas to Indonesia, where the vines can reach a length of up to 3 yards long when they're growing in their natural habitat. They will get fairly long indoors as well, not quite that long, but you can see here this plant has some nice vining going on. By nature, this plant is an epiphyte, so it's an epiphytic plant. And what that means, and I do have videos on epiphytes, and I will put a link below for that video and any other videos I mention in this video. I also have timestamps for the care down below too, so feel free to skip forward to things like lighting, humidity, etc. Okay, so as mentioned, this plant is an epiphyte, and that means that the plant lives on trees and other plants without drawing nutrients from them, so like orchids. So it basically lives on the plants, hangs itself on the other plants. And how it gets its nutrients and water in its native habitat is that it absorbs those nutrients and water. And it uses something like a tree or another vining plant, something like that, to hang itself on. This plant is usually found growing in the angles of branches in the rainforest, so in those little crevices in branches, in trees and such in the rainforest. Okay, so there are about 185 species of this plant, but the more common ones you're seeing, radicans is very common, and this one is a little less common, but there are several varieties you can find for indoor growing. In the indoor environment, this plant often looks really good as a hanging plant, as the one I showed you, one of those photos I showed you, especially when it's mature and full. And to successfully grow this eye-catching indoor bloomer, you want to keep the following tips in mind. Okay, so lighting. Lipstick plant needs a lot of bright light to flower. However, you want to avoid direct light, because especially when the plant is young, because it will burn the foliage and it will cause the plant not to flower. So some good places to put this plant would be an eastern exposure window, and actually this one is grown in an eastern exposure window. If you're going to be putting the plant in a southern window, which can be nice and bright, you want to make sure you don't put it too close to the window, especially during times of the year when it's very bright in that window. So you could have it a few feet away from the window. That can work. They also do really well under full spectrum lighting. So that is another thing that you can use to get them to grow well for you and to flower. Okay, so watering for this beautiful plant. You want to water lipstick plants when they are approaching dryness. You want to avoid letting them dry out, but you don't want to keep them excessively moist, especially in the winter months, because they will get foliar diseases, and they can get root rot if you're really overwatering them. So when to water them is when they're on the 4, just approaching the 3 on the moisture meter. That's usually a good point to water them. You can also pick up the pot if it's in a plastic pot, and if it's a lot lighter, it's time to water them. So keep that in mind. Always water them with warm water. Actually, always water all your houseplants with warm water. If you don't, what you do is you will cause root dieback because it shocks the root. It can also shock the plant itself. So warm water, as mentioned. Don't let them dry out, but don't keep them excessively moist as well. Humidity. Because these plants come from the jungle, they really like high humidity. Their leaves may brown and dry if the humidity falls too low. So some ways that you can deal with that is to mist them, and you can put them on pebble trays. And if you're really dry climate, depending, and maybe during certain times of the year it's a lot drier, they love humidifier. I do have a video on how to use humidifier. I do have videos on how to also up the humidity in the area. So what you want to look for in terms of humidity, 55 to 65% humidity, and the higher, preferably the better for them. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind too that when you group plants, they humidify each other. So if you grow this plant with some other plants, it's going to be more likely to be humidified than if you say have it on top of a bookshelf all by itself. So that's another thing to keep in mind in terms of location. This plant is in an eastern window, as mentioned, with several other plants surrounding it. So they are humidifying each other, and as you can see, it bloomed as well, so it is very happy and looking good. Okay, so up that humidity however possible. Misting, I think I mentioned too. You can mist as well, but you would have to mist several times a day. Temperature. You want to avoid exposing the lipstick vine to temperatures below 55 degrees. That will cause leaf drop in a very unhappy plant. Remembering that they are coming from jungle, humid forests, so keep that in mind. They do prefer 70 to 80 degrees, so that is a rule of thumb there. You can go a little lower, but as mentioned, you really don't want to go a lot lower, and you don't want to go low for long periods of time either. Fertilizing these beauties. Feed them regularly to grow and flower. They do need regular fertilizing. So once a month, spring and summer, and once every 6 weeks in the fall and winter. You want to use a liquid organic fertilizer at half strength. So you're giving them a real low dose of nutrients, and on a fairly continuous basis, and then you can that will help them to bloom. So when to repot? Lipstick vine prefers to be a little on the pot bound side. So, and I do have a video on what pot bound is. That means that they need to be tight in their pot. They like it that way. Now, the reason they like it that way is that's how they grow in nature. So they're hanging, their roots are nestled in between branches and little crevices on trees. So they are used to living with their roots in very cramped quarters. So that's why they do like to be on the pot bound side. So if you get one of these and you think, oh, I'm gonna put it in a bigger pot and it's gonna get huge, please don't. It will not be happy with you. It likely will stop growing, and very likely could get root rot as well. So no need to repot them very often, every 2 to 3 years most likely. You would definitely want the plant to reach that 2/3, 1/3, or go over that 2/3, 1/3 pot combination that I always talk about. So where it gets to 3/4 plant up top and 1/4 pot below, and then you're seeing a good amount of roots down there. And then when you're finding that you're having to water more often, that's another indicator that it's time to repot this plant. So those are the things you want to look for, not just because I've had it for 2 years and it's time to repot it. That's not what you want to do. You want to look for signs that it does need repotting. Okay, so when you do repot, only go up 1 pot size. Be very careful not to go up to too big of a pot, because as mentioned, they like to be pot bound. In that case, if you go up to a really big size pot, it's going to be a long time, and they probably won't ever make it to being pot bound again because they're going to suffer. So a little bit bigger, give them a chance to get pot bound again and do really well again for you and continue to flower for you. They will not flower either if they are in too big of a pot. So if you have one that's not flowering and it may be in too big of a pot, that may be the reason it's not flowering. When you do repot, look for a soil that drains really well, that yet provides moisture retention. A high quality organic potting soil will contain pumice or perlite for drainage, and it will also have other organic nutrients like worm castings. I do have a video on creating your own humus-rich potting soil, and this plant does really well in that. I will put a link below for that as well. Okay, so pruning. These plants don't require a lot of pruning. They're moderate growers, so they grow moderately. They're not really growing crazily, and they're not slow. They're in between. You will want to prune out straggly vines, and if any have had died back, obviously you want to prune them out as well. When the flowers are done, you want to prune them out to just to the base of the flower, next to the vine, next to the stem. And you can propagate the cuttings that you do cut from these plants as well. And I do have a video on propagating the goldfish plant, which is very similar type of plant, and that will work just very well for this plant too. So pests and diseases. Inspect lipstick plant for pests on a regular basis. It's usually not bothered by pests, but every once in a while you will find that you can get a case of mealybugs. And the mealybugs, unfortunately, if they get to the flowers, they will cause the flowers to unfortunately fall off. So you want to keep that in mind and get on top of that before anything happens. Spray it with isopropyl alcohol. 91% is good for that. You can use that or 70% isopropyl alcohol and spray it on several times to get it under control, waiting a week in between, at least 3, 4, or 5 times, and then keep an eye on it. Okay, so they may get spider mites. They thrive in dry conditions. However, so if you do have spider mites, you probably have a little bit too dry of condition going on for this plant to be happy. So you want to raise the humidity level, and that will help with that after treating the spider mites, which you can do with neem oil. And I have a video on neem oil as well. And another thing is try to keep the foliage from staying wet and away from sitting on the soil, as this can lead to fungal disease such as leaf spotting, which I did mention earlier too. So that is something else to keep in mind. Now for flowering for these beauties, to get those beautiful flowers there, well, you need to be patient. Because these plants are just kind of finicky about when they flower. You want to do all these things right, but you just need to be patient and then surprised when they flower. It's kind of like a present that you didn't expect, because you will suddenly see the plant flowering and think, oh my gosh, it's flowering. I thought it was never going to flower. So, and that's that's what you need to keep in mind. Young lipstick plants don't flower that often either, so they need to be a little more on the mature side, like this one is. And they will appear more regularly once the plant matures, and providing too that you do all of the things that we've covered in this video, that will also help them to flower on a regular basis for you. So there you go, how to keep the lovely lipstick plant healthy and happy and growing well in your indoor garden. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.